Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Portland Utility Board's first meeting for December. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can also provide written testimony to the board through emailing us at utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. Pub believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with Pub. While everyone has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted towards people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. This means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. And how do we foster a space of learning and growth? We speak up and we speak out. We know that each person on this board is empowered to maintain the culture of the board, and we will remain focused on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, not the person.
Hi, my name is Amy Archer-Masters, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing or just that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by me, so please limit chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and haven't been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. I may lower your hand once you begin speaking just to maintain the flow of conversation. During public comment periods, you are welcome to raise your hand and you'll be called on when appropriate. If connecting by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Videos can be turned on when speaking. If desired, it's not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you're connecting by phone, you'll need to press *6 to mute or unmute. Public comment, as mentioned, will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with me or raise your hand during that period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, the meeting's recorded. I'll pass it back to you, Robin.
All right, and so we've got a handful of items on our agenda today. I think we'll mainly be focusing on the natural resources conversation that we discussed last time with Michelle and have previously tried to engage with a letter. And then we'll also be having we'll hear about the proposed Columbia Slough agreement and determine if we as a board want to engage with submitting feedback. And so that'll be our main focuses today. All right, so let's get started. Any pub members want to disclose any forms of communications? Go ahead and speak now. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I had multiple communications about the rates, and I testified at the hearing, and I hope we have a chance to talk a little bit today about what happened at that hearing. I did not testify for the pub, by the way. I testified on behalf of Lima Riverkeeper, but I did note that the pub had endorsed it.
Thank you for that. Any other voting members have any disclosures of communications they need to say before we move on? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we can move on to the next. All right, this is a moment for public comment. Amy, has anyone submitted public comment before the meeting today?
Not received anything in advance and no chats. So if you're in the room and would like to give comment, please raise your hand.
All right, I'm not seeing any hand raising, so we'll move on to the next. Board, right now we want to review and approve the draft minutes from the November 16th pub meeting. Please raise your hand or speak up if there's anything that needs to be edited from that minutes. Not hearing any objections, I would move that we accept the minutes as they are for November 16th. All right. So actually, Amy, with this one, did you want me to speak on the subcommittee, or would you like to, maybe should they speak on it?
Yeah, if there's a member of the committee who wants to speak up, they certainly can. Otherwise, I will go ahead and share kind of the key decisions that were made. But we do have several members in the room, so feel free to step up.
Heather or Alexis. I see Alexis here. How about I give a quick summary, and Heather, if you want to chime in and add anything I missed, would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay, super. Hello everyone, Karen Williams, voting member and of the pub, and also a member of the recruitment subcommittee. We convened, about 10 days ago, I think. I'm losing track of the exact day, but it was 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, as I recall. And we had a very productive meeting. And with Amy's always invaluable assistance in sort of pulling together on virtual paper everything that came out of our mouths, we came up with a draft for what we hope is a final draft for the announcement for the recruitment. And we came to the collective decision and recommendation to the full pub that we go ahead and open our recruitment pretty much ASAP before we get into the thick of holiday communications and vacations and such, and but leave it open until the week after MLK Day so that there is time to maybe time for us to do some outreach to our communities of interest that we work with, and time for folks to enjoy the holidays and apply for civic engagement when they come back from holiday vacations and such. So leaving it open until January 22nd, I believe, was our recommendation. And let's see, just to summarize sort of the content of what we accomplished in our short meeting was to I would say the main thing was kind of trying to slim it down, make the application itself, the intent was not quite so intimidating. So where we had a really long list of potential interests, you could be a great candidate to be on pub if you had an interest in any of these things. And then we had a super long list of some pretty wonky, potentially elements, as well as community engagement and equity work and so forth. So we slimmed that down, sort of clumped some categories together. And I would say the other more sort of substantive change we made to the announcement, we mainly built on the announcement that went out last year, which we felt overall was really good and got the feedback from previous year's subcommittees that it had worked well. But we also tried to highlight right up front that this is a particularly exciting time to be engaged in any community advisory board at the City of Portland, but particularly pub, because of the ensuing transition to a new form of government, and tried to make a plug for that as an opportunity to participate in an advisory board at a time when you can really have influence over decisions that are made and sort of future course for the city. I'll turn it over to Heather for anything that Heather would like to mention that I missed.
No, you did a really great job. I think that one thing that we are just really trying to do is to make the application more succinct and more accessible to a greater amount of people with diverse interests.
One formal thing that does need to happen, and before we do that, I will call on you, Joe, but let me just say one thing first, is because of time constraints, and particularly around the holidays, I've made changes to the application, and we'll probably have to make more minor changes just so that it fits into Civic Life's format. So we just want to get general agreement in a public meeting from this group, particularly from subcommittee members who are present, which includes Heather and Karen, as well as Alexis is not here, but we do also have staff who participate on the subcommittee. Farshad is in the room. The Portland Water Bureau representative is not here today. But just get general agreement to proceed. And then I will continue to work with Civic Life to get it posted as quickly as possible. So it could either be a formal vote or if I can just see some agreement, but not yet. Let's first hear from Joe and see what questions or comments.
Thank you. This is Joe Spada, ex officio Water Bureau staff. I just wanted clarification. The date that you referenced, did you say the 22nd or 27th? 2/2 or 2/7?
Tentatively right now it's the 22nd. It kind of depends on when Civic Life is able to post. So they preliminarily have said that they can get it posted pretty quickly, but of course we're in the middle of holidays and they're undergoing a lot of change. So I'm not 100% sure how quickly it will go up, and we want to make sure it's open long enough both before holidays and after holidays that we can get a good candidate pool.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So with that, is there any concern for members about proceeding with the draft that you've seen or generally to that form with changes that are needed to convert it to the Civic Life format? If so, please let us know now. And otherwise, thumbs up. And I'm sorry, I was wrong. Cecilia is in the room. That Cecilia is the iPhone number. So we have.
Hey, this is Robin. Giving a general thumbs up to the application, as I've worked in these recruitment subgroups. And so I really do like how the application has advanced over the last couple of years. And I like the consolidation. I did have one question, and that is explicitly about the stipend. And I was wondering, is the question of, do you need this money, necessary? I know it's currently on the application as we're trying to quantify the need, but I have noticed since we added it, the majority of people have said, no, the $500 did not impact their decision. And to me, I read that as we're quantifying our not need of something and not acknowledging that we are actually more educated than the community at large, and that reflection might be a reflection of our privilege and not of the value of the labor that we put into volunteering for this board. And so I wasn't sure if that was a question that we needed to keep, because it kind of felt like it was maybe working against us by more people saying, oh no, I don't really need that money.
That's a great point, Robin. And it isn't noted in the draft that you saw. We actually did discuss that one and the potential of removing it. It was originally in order to collect data that Civic Life wanted to collect. And so I don't know that it applies anymore because there's more time has passed and how they're collecting data has changed. And we were kind of serving as a pilot during that original period. So my hope is that that one will be removed. So I'll make note of that was the feedback as well, because I think that lines up with what the subcommittee discussed as well.
Well, thank you. And I saw a couple thumbs up, so I'm assuming there was general support of what was proposed.
I think that was agreement enough for me, so I will make note of it. And then this next item, I think Bob mentioned wanting to have some discussion. Of course, I put it on this announcement slide just because it's carryover from prior meetings. So wanted to take just a few moments for any comments as a result of that hearing.
Bob, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did attend the hearing. I also learned 2 days before the hearing, less than 2 days before the hearing, that in fact a decision was made to remove overwater structures, including houseboats and industrial overwater structures, from the rate proposal. They're exempted. And if you recall, we did talk about this at prior meetings. In fact, we did an addendum to our letter specifically requesting that the commissioner in charge not make any last minute sort of outside process decisions to remove anything, that the whole rate study should go forward. And of course, it is the prerogative of the commission to amend any aspect of it. That's absolutely their prerogative. I think what's so troubling about this, and it's becoming a pattern, unfortunately, with this city council, is that we're seeing a lot of examples of things getting changed right before the hearing, after they've gone out for public comment. And when you do that, what happens is they come out of the proposal, and it's very hard for the public to react at that last minute to those kinds of changes. In this case, the houseboat community, which has been organized since the last rate proposal half a decade ago, was very, very well organized. They got 2 extra outside of process hearings specifically about their concerns, and then they were exempted. So anyways, I just wanted to update people on that. I thought it was a very, very discouraging thing to see. Those rates will get redistributed to everybody who doesn't live on an overwater structure. We'll pay for that instead of them. I think staff did an outstanding job documenting why it was appropriate for those groups to pay rates. And I was particularly discouraged that it seemed to be in part based on this idea that houseboats, for some people, are affordable housing. I'm not disputing that some houseboats are affordable housing, but I think to do that based on no data and to exempt an entire class of housing makes absolutely no sense. In fact, I think it's embarrassing to do it that way, because the reality is that a lot of houseboats are very, very expensive. In fact, if you went on Zillow the week of the hearing, you would have seen houseboats for $800,000, $700,000, $600,000. Not a whole lot that were affordable housing. And plus, we do have mechanisms in place already for people who are lower income to support them in the rates. And so they should have been accessing those rather than exempting everybody. So that's the outcome. I actually thought about resigning from this committee at that point, because I'm not sure what the point is, honestly, of having these oversight committees weigh in and then get ignored. And I think we've been ignored too many times at this point, and I'm extremely discouraged. The reason I'm staying on at this point is because I want to be part of hopefully transitioning to a government that is more responsive, but I've never seen a government that works the way this one does in Portland. This is just, from my perspective, very, very discouraging.
Just for the record, one thing to add, because as you mentioned, the pub did compose a letter, and so I think this was in my email as well, but just wanted to note that the letter that the pub had originally provided, I did provide as part of the feedback for that hearing. But of course, with that last minute change, there wasn't any direct comment about the change that was being made. It just stood in its original form, speaking about the whole package. And I think, Bob, you mentioned that there was a supplement to that letter that did not go to all of council. What Pub had directed was a request to Commissioner Mapp's office to be notified if any changes were being considered, which of course they did notify us. It was just very late in the game, so there wasn't enough time for Pub to actually convene and have any comment. My understanding, and staff could correct me if I'm wrong, the changes that were made took that element out of the recommendations or the changes that we're moving forward. It doesn't prohibit it from being put back in later. I don't know what the next steps are related to that and in what way Pub will be able to engage, but certainly we'll find out and let you all know as well.
Candidly,
Yeah,
I'll just jump back.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think it's actually honestly a joke to suggest, and I'm not suggesting your statement is, but the council suggesting that they left it in and they could revisit it someday. I think we need to remember that 7 years ago, they exempted overwater structures because this exact same group, which is lawyered up, was lawyered up then, was lawyered up now, came in and raised the stink. And city council 7 years ago said, hey, let's go back and get solid data, make sure that we really have our I's dotted and our T's crossed, and make sure that we really have good justification for these being included in the rates. And I think they did an outstanding job. They went through a big public process. And I think the reason folks were exempted was because they came in and they were organized and they were lawyered up. And so they got a special exemption that no one else in the city of Portland is getting. And they brought their lawyers with them to the hearing. They still weren't satisfied. And so when I hear, well, they can bring it back someday, this was someday. They've been exempted for the last 7 years. They just got exempted again. There's no reason to think that they will be brought back in. And frankly, there's no reason to waste any more taxpayer money going through these kinds of processes if we're just going to exempt them at the last minute behind closed doors. So I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, but I am, because this was the next time and it took us 7 years to get back to it. And we didn't even give it the courtesy of having a hearing on it. It was pulled out 24 hours ahead of the hearing. Why bother? Why spend the money? Why have us review it? Why have us weigh in if it's not going to even see the damn light of day?
All right. Well, Bob, I want to say thank you. You are absolutely a valuable resource, and I actually really appreciate your frankness with this. And I'm glad that you are as engaged as you are, because I think we need to be having more frank conversations. And yes, just a reminder, the work that we do a lot with Pub has like 3 to 5 year timelines, but the work that we're doing really is the long term. So it is a nice reminder of like, hey, people were checking in on this half a decade ago, and this was the check-in point, and reminding ourselves that we are part of that auditing process to be like, hey, you said you would do this and you still haven't. So we're keeping them correct. And with that, let's actually go into our first official topic of the day, which is just a continuation of kind of we had talked about submitting a letter, being upset about the general process, how quickly the process had gone, and then we were also engaging on how we wanted natural resources, where we wanted that in the new city structure. And so this is definitely a continuation of our conversation with Michelle and Jacques at our last meeting. And then, I think we're going to review the letter that we've drafted and see how we like it, and then going just steps forward. I'm not sure if Amy wants to add anything to that.
No, the only thing that I would add is one of the items, and we can speak to this when we get to it in the letter as well, was the request for some joint information sharing between Pub and the Parks Board or other stakeholders, so that you're both getting the same consistent information. And staff did reach out just prior to, or at the end of last week, I think, about potentially using the January 9th Parks Board meeting from 5 to 7 p.m. as one of those joint meetings. I have not heard back from all board members about who can or can't attend. I did hear at least feedback from one member suggesting that at least a couple board members would participate and report back to the board. And then I think others, at least during the meeting, had indicated wanting a full board presence as much as possible. So I just want to put that on the table for discussion as well. But I will pause for just a moment and pull up the letter. Give me a moment. Okay, so as always, when we're coming back to things that you've crafted in prior meetings, this can be the starting place, or if people feel otherwise and want to have discussion before we get to the letter itself, that is fine as well. I have received some feedback from one member just since the meeting. And so the red highlights that you see on the screen, those are incorporating some edits to try to be responsive to some of the feedback that was received. So I'll just quickly highlight those just because there's a couple so that you're aware. One of them was about specifically calling out opposition to the amendment that was passed. And so I did that by reorganizing this first section to try to call out the three things that I sensed that you were trying to accomplish in the letter. So with that addition, it would be opposition to the amendment that passed, the distress about the public process, and then the request for increasing coordinated engagement. So that's how I structured it at the beginning. Obviously, that is open to feedback, or could be that opposition could be incorporated somewhere else in the letter as well, and that would work fine. The other changes, I think, were relatively minor. The other change was just to specifically call out council in the end of the letter, and then the last piece was just a flag for a section to discuss. So we can get to that as we work through the letter. I'm open to all of you guiding us on any sections that you want to revisit, or if there's any significant content that either has been discussed at one of the prior meetings but has been missed in incorporating into the letter, or that has been included but you don't want to include it and maybe want to engage more directly in the work session when and if that happens. So I open the floor to you all. And if anybody needs me to scroll to a particular section, please let me know. If we're silent for a while, I'll just skip down to the next section so that if you're reading it, you can have opportunity to read the next section. Just feel free to jump in. Yeah, Robin.
Hey, this is Robin raising my hand. When I was reviewing the minutes from the last meeting, I was reminded that I had specifically made a comment after Michelle had spoke that we weren't sure if Pub explicitly supported or opposed any amendment that was provided, but that we specifically were against the rushed process and what seemed like it undemocratic. And so I just wanted to figure out if we as a board do fully oppose Ryan's amendment, or if we were trying to say, no matter the amendment, we were actually upset with how it was processed, not whatever the amendments themselves were saying. I see Julia's hand is raised if they want to respond.
My recollection was that we did have a strong preference that the natural resource agency approach, or natural resource kind of like big bucket, was the right approach. It was obviously going to require refinement and, a process to get that right, but we were ready to lean into that process. And then I think there were some serious concerns that Bob did a really good job of articulating. So I might ask you to jump in, Bob, here, but like basically saying, like parks would be absorbing programs that they even have said in the past they didn't want to do. They were going to absorb programs they didn't have expertise to implement and to do. So I mean, there was I think significant concerns about the Ryan proposal in and of itself, in addition to the fact that the process was absolutely anti-democratic and not okay. So that was my impression of how that conversation went. But like, I think it's good to make sure we have clarity as a commission on that front.
I see your hand raised, Karen. Go ahead.
Thanks, Robin. Karen Williams speaking. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree that we did not make an explicit statement or take a vote or any formal decision explicitly saying that we opposed that particular amendment. But I do think that the specificity of the concerns that were called out in our last meeting were very much tied to concerns, as Julia said, to that specific amendment. For everything Julia said, and there was quite explicit concern stated about potential repercussions from, not following the lessons learned from the Anderson lawsuit, and using rate funds inappropriately. And that seemed to be, to me, and this is just me speaking, very directly tied to, essentially a explicit statement against what the Ryan amendment in fact proposed and in fact what was passed. So yeah, maybe opposition implies a formal decision. But I thought, to me, it sounded like more than concern. So I don't know. Synonym for opposition that doesn't imply a vote maybe is a better word, but I don't have that right off the top of my head.
Thank you, Karen. Looks like Chris has a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we need to be pretty explicit in that he did this without even running it by legal to find out if it's possible, which I don't know how to nicely say. And please don't be doing things without checking with legal to make sure it's legal. It just seems that was a basic first step that did not happen. So I think that we really need to directly say, hey, please don't be doing that sort of thing. We have in-house counsel at the city for a reason. It shouldn't have been that hard for a commissioner to reach out to legal and find out if this is even okay.
This is Amy, and one potential suggestion, if people aren't comfortable with the language and the way that I phrased it to capture the original recommendation to have stated opposition, is we could add a little bit of that clarification, I think that Chris and others have hinted at, which is opposition to the Ryan amendment, passed at this council meeting without sufficient process and legal review or something to that effect.
And that sounds good.
And so with comment paused at the moment, I'll scroll down a little bit so that you can see subsequent sections as well.
I do like how frank we're being here about like we've complained again and again. Please hear us. And then also the middle paragraph, which is we've been met with dismissal and defensiveness rather than reflection. I appreciate that.
Okay, I will keep scrolling down a bit so you can see kind of the final section that calls out the requests. So this final section is where we've captured the pieces that have been requested. And I know I did have somebody who had flagged this last bullet regarding the good or excellent condition. So I just wanted to make space for a comment about that. Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Karen Williams speaking. Yeah, and this was more just me not quite remembering the context and just wanting to better understand. Wanting to better understand mentioning this particular item. And I assumed, given Bob's knowledge of the issue, that this comment was taken from something that Bob had said at the last meeting that I'm just not remembering. So if I'm wrong about that, then I mean, I think the language is fine. I just wanted to kind of better understand where the good and excellent condition and the rating and the measurement and how that kind of related to holding natural resources budgets harmless. And I don't know, Bob, can you help me understand that better? Or
in absence of Bob speaking up, although maybe he's just muted, I want to create space. This did pull from some comments that Bob made during the last meeting, and I'll share what I understand it to be based on kind of insider language. And if it needs context for you, even if council doesn't need that context, it might be helpful to clarify and figure out what context needs to be added to the letter so that it is understandable to other people. I think if it doesn't, it's not clear to you as an insider, then we may want to add some language to be clearer. So I believe the good and excellent are pulling from the city asset management language, where they are for each asset that's owned, they have the fair, poor, good, excellent, kind of the range of condition, with the goal of getting things above the poor or failing. Oh, I'm not sure what the bottom ones are, but the lower ones up to being good or excellent, so that they're basically seen as receiving the preventive maintenance that they need, that they're funded adequately to kind of move into the future, and not falling into poor quality. So I think that's the intent here, is that if assets exist that are already good or excellent, you want to make sure that they're staying there and not taking away funds that are maintaining them or sustaining them in some way. And if there are others that are in lower quality, that you're continuing to increase funding into the future so that they will improve and not have increase the problem that the utilities have with the significant deferred maintenance issues. Bob, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what I interpreted it to be. So the way I wrote it was along those lines.
That was extremely helpful, Amy. And I think what I was missing was the sort of the reference to the asset management strategy. Once it's put in that context, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I get what we're saying there. So maybe just referencing what that, yeah, good or excellent condition, like as defined in or as quantified in such and such asset management strategy. And then that whole context makes much more sense for me. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the letter. So are there any other sections that folks wanted to discuss, have questions about, wanted to tweak in any way, or how are folks feeling about the current version of the letter? I think the only edit that's kind of a question is for me to pull that language that Karen just referenced to make sure that I'm using the right internal language here. So I will look for that. Otherwise, are people feeling like the letter is ready to finalize, submit to council? What do you want as far as next steps? Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel very comfortable making a motion to finalize this letter with edits that we see on the screen and send to City Council.
Seconded, Chris Richard.
All right, so does that mean we start group discussion and then public comment? Is that the steps?
Yes, if there's any additional discussion at this point, now would be the time, and then we'll take public comment.
Not hearing any discussion. Do we have any members of the public who would like to make public comment on this?
Because somebody just entered the room, just for clarity, the hub has made a motion to accept the edited letter and submit to council, and currently accepting public comment before they vote.
All right, well, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand for public comment, so I think it'd be best to move to the official vote then.
Yes, so Robin, you're up first.
All right, Robin Castro, voting member, I vote yes.
Chris Richard, voting member, I vote yes.
Heather J. Melgar, voting member, I vote yes.
Karen Williams, voting member, I vote yes.
Lorraine, you would
Lorraine
be
Wilson, voting member, I vote yes.
Bob, if you want to vote, you can vote now.
Let's move to Julia and then come back to Bob.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'm wondering if he had to step away, but yeah, Julia DeGraw, voting member, I vote yes. I texted Bob to see if that helps.
And it's okay because you still have 6 members, even if he has been disconnected. So you do have a quorum to reach that decision. So I can just note it for the vote in the record.
And with that, Amy, do you need anyone to assist you to finalize those edits?
Sorry, trying to juggle sharing a new screen and find the unmute buttons. Apologies for the delay. I don't think so, because I think the only edit is I need to connect with staff and make sure I use the right language there. So if there's anything that's outside the bounds of what was discussed in the meeting, then I will check back in with you, Robin, as chair, if necessary, but I don't think it would be necessary unless folks felt otherwise. So I think I can finalize it and submit it to council.
All right, wonderful. So I think the yeses have it.
Yes.
Wonderful. And so with that, we can go to our second part of the conversation today, which we will be talking about the proposed Columbia Slough Agreement. And so if Amy Von Berg from the Bureau of Environmental Service is here, please reveal yourself. Welcome to Pub. And unless Amy needs an extra adding their introduction, you can just go ahead and start.
Thank you so much, all the members of the board and to Chair Castro. I'm Annie Von Berg. I'm the Environmental Remediation Manager here at the Bureau of Environmental Services. I'm here with 2 other presenters today. Andrew Davidson is a manager for the Columbia Slough Sediment Program, and also our DEQ colleague, Sarah Miller, who's a manager with the DEQ Cleanup Program. So we're really excited to bring this presentation to you today. This is a proposed agreement that we've been working on with DEQ to advance cleanup work in the Columbia Slough. This is a big milestone for this project that we've been working on for nearly 30 years. So a lot of work that has been invested from BES on this work. So for the presentation today, we'll give you a brief overview of the cleanup site itself, the approach up to date for that cleanup, and a summary of our new agreement and what we're hoping to achieve with that new agreement. There will be time at the very end for questions, but please feel free to stop us at any time if you have any question about the content or need any clarification about what's being presented. Next slide, please. All right, so many of you are probably aware that Columbia Slough main channel runs 19 miles parallel to the Columbia River at about city of Fairview down to the Willamette River, with over 30 miles of secondary waterways. So huge area there, with a map there on that slide, which might be a little hard to see. Over 100 years of agricultural industrial practices have left widespread contamination in the sediment at the bottom of the slough. So these contaminations, it's commingled throughout the site, but we have things like PCBs and pesticides that have bioaccumulated in fish, making resident fish harmful to eat. Next slide, please. So in 2005, DEQ issued a record of decision that would establish the framework for how this contamination would be addressed. And that framework included things like controlling upland sources of pollution, cleaning up the high levels of contaminated sediment, initiating long-term monitoring for fish tissue and sediment, developing alternative remedial measures to help reach cleanup goals, and importantly, leaving flexibility to modify the approach as new information over time became available. Since then, the city has worked closely with DEQ to advance this work, specifically focusing on the sampling, the investigation, and controlling those upland sources of pollution. Now, after 30 years, the good news that there is conditions have improved across the slough, but risk-based sediment concentrations are not achievable in the foreseeable future. So what that means basically is all of the low-hanging fruit over the last few decades has now been addressed. So to see improvement kind of moving forward to meet cleanup goals, it's time to reevaluate our approach here. In this slide here, kind of like I had mentioned, that the city has been working with DEQ now for several decades on this work. And that's both as a partner, but also as a potentially responsible party. The city owns and operates over 200 of the 700 outfalls that discharge to the Columbia Slough. It's kind of hard to see on that map, but those blue dots there are the city owned and operated outfalls. So that is primarily the reason why the city is a potentially responsible party at this cleanup site. Next slide, please. As a responsible party, the city has been working with DEQ under a series of IGAs throughout time to implement the cleanup plan. Those agreements have been voluntary, they've been flexible, but they've not been legally binding throughout time. This year, we were in the process of preparing for our 5-year renewal of the agreement. And as part of that preparation, the city and DEQ came together and agreed that this would be a good time to kind of reevaluate our approach and really start shifting our focus and resources from investigation, which has been a huge part of what we've been doing, to really action in those cleanup goals. So this would better support our shared remediation goals, but it would also open up an opportunity to better protect public resources and open up opportunities to bring in communities more effectively into the cleanup and restoration process. Next slide, perfect. This new agreement would be a departure from our previous IGA structures. This will be a consent decree as it is proposed right now, or a consent judgment rather. This means it will be legally binding. So we will have a defined long-term work plan, and that work will be required to be done. It will also settle our liability at this site. So this is a settlement. This will give us closure and make sure we're getting formal credit for the work and the resources that we're investing. Without this structure of an agreement, we can conceivably go under many, many more IGAs, but we wouldn't necessarily be gaining the legal credit towards our liability for the work that we're doing here at this site. This way we have an opportunity to kind of get past the low-hanging fruit to really accelerate progress as much as possible while gaining the legal protection in this really large, complex site. The next slide, please. So in addition to kind of gaining legal credit as we move forward here, we have a set of goals that we really set out for ourselves as we were working through this new agreement. And those are to accelerate progress to meet cleanup goals sooner. So this means that this area would be safer sooner. Also look for opportunities where we can effectively bring in the community to the cleanup restoration processes and really evaluate and lift up environmental justice opportunities. Also, this is an opportunity for us to really focus in on protecting resources and to better define the city's contribution and role in the cleanup process. So this is being really clear on what our work is now, what it is moving into the future, and how it is contributing to our end goal. Also, lastly, our goal here on this slide is to complete the work sooner to manage the risks from uncertainties like rising cost of environmental cleanups. When we look at these big cleanups that are complex, there's a lot of uncertainties that comes with this. But one thing that we do know for sure is that these cleanups get really expensive really fast. And so this is a way for us to kind of get this work done sooner, and so we have the ability to kind of manage the scale of cost here and really fix the dollars that the city would be contributing. And I'm going to kick it over to Andrew, who's going to go over the kind of the high level terms and summary of the proposed agreement that we have.
Thanks, Annie, and thank you, members of the board, for letting us share this presentation with you. It's a really exciting point for all of us, and it's been a real great experience getting to work with DEQ over this. I think we've got a really great partnership in place, and really excited about the work ahead. So as Annie said, there are a number of terms that are proposed in this agreement, and they generally fall under the funding or work categories. So the first in terms of funding is to pay DEQ a cash amount to perform some in-water sediment cleanup work. DEQ has already completed a lot of in-water work in terms of characterization over the past 30 years and has already addressed several cleanup sites within the slough. But still, there are a number of sites that we know about that need to be addressed, and providing funding to DEQ to move that work along will make a substantial difference. In addition to the funding for in-water sediment cleanup, the city will also provide funding for natural resource damages to both DEQ and ODF&W, who manage that work, primarily for habitat restoration and mitigation work. And actually, if you don't mind, could you quickly go back to the previous? Thank you. And then the city will also provide funding to DEQ for additional source control resources. So as Annie said previously, the city is a responsible party because of its management of the municipal stormwater conveyance system. And so the city will provide resources to DEQ to help address upland sources. And then for the category of work to be performed over the next 15 years, the city will perform and implement what we're calling alternative remedial measures, which are additional actions to boost the overall watershed health of the Columbia Slough, and do that in conjunction with community. And then the city will also be doing a lot of upland storm water treatment and source control work itself over the next 15 years. And lastly, we will complete what will be our fourth round of slough-wide sediment, fish tissue, and sediment sampling. Next slide, please. So for the first bucket, the city will pay DEQ $16 million to address high priority sediment cleanup areas. These sediment sites, typically the ones that have been completed to date, such as at Columbia Steel, at Pacific Meat, near the St. John's landfill, these have ranged around $2 million a piece. And the state is looking to move a number of other cleanup sites forward, considering technologies such as dredging and capping, such as with activated carbon caps. A lot of these areas are associated with older industrial and agricultural operations that discharged priority pollutants such as PCBs, pesticides like DDT, and PAHs. So this money that the city will provide DEQ will substantially move that work ahead. Secondly, the city will provide DEQ $2 million for natural resource damages. And this is for, as I mentioned earlier, things like flood mitigation, habitat restoration, invasive species removal, which this work DEQ performs in conjunction with ODF&W and often goes hand in hand with these remedies. Next slide, please. And then secondly, the city will complete what we're calling alternative remedial measures. And as I mentioned before, these are actions that are called out within the record of decision that are intended to improve the overall watershed health. And these could include things like improving fish and wildlife habitat, connecting riparian habitat, managing invasive species, or improving hydrology or connectivity within the slough. And one of the things that we are most excited about this work is that it will really incorporate community input with community defined actions in collaboration with an environmental justice lens. And just as a brief example, the photo that's presented here is one such project that the city has worked on for the last several years. It's called the Showcake Wetland Site. And it's been a site that the city owns in the Pin 1 area of the Columbia Slough. It's a former pumpkin patch area. And we've been working with Portland State's Indigenous Studies program to look at indigenous, traditional, ecological, cultural knowledge and techniques to restore the land. A lot of intention to really develop this site with community and start growing native plants and first foods. It's been a really wonderful process to be a part of, and we envision that similar types of projects could happen within the Columbia Slough watershed under this category. Next slide, please. And then in addition to the cash payments and the alternative remedial measures, a big portion of the work that the city will be performing over the next 15 years will be actively addressing upland sources that discharge through the city's municipal conveyance system. As part of the agreement, there are 15 active treatment systems that will be installed in large and priority basins that discharge Columbia Boulevard primarily. 13 of these basins have already gone through either our integrated planning process or are currently in the design phase with our engineers under our CIP work. We identified in collaboration with DEQ 2 additional basins that would also require treatment. And then along with installation of stormwater treatment in our large priority basins, we'll be working collaboratively with DEQ to identify sources that are discharging to our different municipal conveyance systems, and where needed, referring those to appropriate regulatory enforcement programs. And then lastly, in addition to this work, the city will continue its ongoing responsibilities in regards to managing its MS4 permit, its TMDL permit, and also making sure that sites that are redeveloping are triggering our stormwater management manual and in compliance with city code requirements. Next slide. So part of the work that we have done here over the last really 6 or 7 months in collaboration with DEQ is to identify a process that we can walk through each and every one of our city outfall basins to identify sites that are discharging to the municipal stormwater conveyance system, and if they are discharging contaminants of concern at concentrations that we want to address, coming up with a clear process to get those sites identified and in the right regulatory enforcement program. So we have already been in the process of developing a work plan. It's been, I think we have a really good path forward that we're excited about. And in addition to this work that we're going to start moving ahead with, we are also providing funding to DEQ so that they can more effectively help us bring sites that are known to be problematic upland sources into appropriate regulatory enforcement programs, such as DEQ's voluntary cleanup program. Next slide. And then lastly, the city will conduct one more. This will be our 4th slough-wide sampling event, which will include fish tissue sampling from 50 locations within the slough. This work to date has been used to inform the Oregon Health Authority Fish Advisory for the Columbia Slough. And then in conjunction with that, in 2026, we will also be collecting a slough-wide sediment sampling event. Excuse me. So this comprehensive data set has really been helpful in identifying and delineating some of those areas of higher concentrations within the slough itself. And this is a data set that's been really useful for DEQ in moving their in-water cleanup work along. One thing we can report to date is that concentrations in the slough are generally holding steady or decreasing. So a lot of the stormwater work and redevelopment under city code is having an effect. So we're excited about that. But one of the things that we will be sampling for in this next sampling event will be PFAS, which is on a lot of folks' radar. So it'll be the first major PFAS data set that we will have in this area. Next slide. All right, and I'm going to kick it over to Sarah Miller from DEQ.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks everyone for having me here. So here's just kind of a final roll-up of the details of this proposed agreement. You can see here it's $16 million to DEQ for the in-water cleanup, $2 million for DEQ and ODFW habitat restoration, $1.5 million for additional source control resources to DEQ to help with those upland sources, $4 million for alternative remedial measures, and that will be completed by the city. The city will also install upland stormwater treatment systems in 15 priority basins over that next 15 years. And also within that 15 years, the city will evaluate all 209 city basins. And then finally, the city will implement a comprehensive fish tissue and sediment sampling event. Great, next slide. So from DEQ's perspective, we can enter into a consent judgment agreement, but we have to identify how it provides public benefit, not only for DEQ as well. So each of these items and the proposed agreements provide or contribute to the requirements of the Columbia Slough Record of Decision or Cleanup Plan. So you can see here it expedites the sediment cleanup to reduce risk to human health and the environment by getting those cleanups and designed and implemented quicker. It also, like Annie was saying, it helps with expedites kind of the monetary risk as well. As we all know, inflation is also a factor these days. It also provides prioritize watershed health improvements to benefit communities that are most affected by this historical contamination within the slough itself. It increases the capacity for DEQ to prevent and control sources of pollution right at the source by providing additional funds to DEQ for not only city basins, but we can also use those funds for outside of city basins as well for those priority sources. It increases and improves public health communication by providing additional sampling event for the fish sampling and informing that fish advisory. And then finally, you know, it has the direct opportunity to use these resources to focus work on justice. And so as Annie and Andrew mentioned, you know, DEQ and the city have been collaborating a long time through these intergovernment agreements. And based on that relationship, I think DEQ is very confident that that will continue moving forward as we kind of are, you know, kind of from these previous like investigation and characterization activities that we've conducted over the past 10 or 15 years, and we're going to move forward into these more cleanup and action items in the next 15 years, and to provide lasting enhancements to the watershed itself. Next slide, please. And so as a part of this agreement, proposed agreement, DEQ has, you know, goes through a series of outreach and public comment. And so DEQ did a numerous stakeholder engagement to not only, you know, local governments, Port of Portland, Metro, State of Gresham, and also environmental groups like the Columbia Slough Watershed Council, just to give them a heads up and presentation of this agreement, this proposed agreement that was coming through. So they would be, you know, have that information available before and right during the public comment period, which started November 1st. I should also mention we connected with tribal groups as well. And so we had the public comment period between November 1st. It started or it ended in November 30th. We had our public comment meeting, a public informational meeting. There's several, probably about several folks that attended that, and went really well. We received 4 comments as a part of that work. All were either in support or we provided additional clarification on some of the minor details of the agreement. So the public comments we didn't find any like substantive comments with that, and we feel confident kind of moving forward with the next phase of this agreement. So I will kind of, I guess, hand it back over to Annie on yours. side of the outreach and next steps.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, gathered feedback. We've done internal kind of coordination also within the Bureau of Environmental Services and reached out to other fellow agencies to give them a heads up and collect feedback. So that's what we're sharing back with you today, is that for the vast majority of folks and organizations that we have been sharing this with, we've gotten positive feedback, no negative feedback up to this point. So now this is an opportunity for us to share it with the pub, invite your feedback, any thoughts, feedback you would like us to consider as we are pulling together kind of the final pieces of this and scheduling a council date for council consideration. Once council votes on this, then we'll go to the next step, which is filing this in state court. But we're now at the point in the process where we'd love to hear any feedback that the pub has regarding the agreement.
Lorraine, go ahead.
Thanks, Lorraine Wilson, pub member. If I'm understanding this correctly, with all the money that is being allotted by different agencies towards the cleanup, my first question is, who actually does the physical cleanup?
Great. Thank you, Lorraine. Great question. I can kick this over to Sarah. The way that the agreement is currently written is that we would provide a set amount of funds, which is that $16 million. It would be paid out over 3 years. And then DEQ would be taking the lead on doing the work itself for the cleanup.
Yeah. So
Oh, go ahead.
DEQ would be, so DEQ would be responsible for those cleanup work. So DEQ would issue, do the design work, have contractors go out and do the oversight of those contractors to do the actual cleanup work. So this would all be led by DEQ.
Okay, so in one of the slides,
Oh, you went on mute there, Lorraine.
I'm sorry, I'm on my phone, so I'm trying to maneuver
No worries.
my phone. So based on that information that contracts would be awarded, in this one of these slides, you mention expedites sediment cleanup to reduce risk to human health and environment. What precautions or what information, or I'm assuming that there's information that will be included in those RFPs to ensure that the contractors who are actually doing the physical work, that their employees, and when I say that, in more cases than not, they are the employees who are the lowest paid in the totem pole, and the cleaner uppers who are actually doing the taking out the contaminated stuff and all of that, are protected from being impacted by that work.
Sure. Yeah. So when there's any sort of cleanup work that's done, whether it's in the slough or other places, typically DEQ would require that there's like what we call a contaminated media management plan that describes, health and safety requirements that might be needed for those particular cleanups. And so that is definitely a component of the work to make sure that the workers are safe when they're doing the cleanup work.
But very often we know this sounds good in theory, but the actuality doesn't happen. And then years down the line, we are seeing individuals or people impacted by poor practices that are impacting communities who are disproportionately impacted by these avenues. And I wanted to raise it for that specific reason, that in theory, I used to work out at the Hanford site, right? And there are a number of claims right now over the years about the impacts of what the cleanup looks like and what is actually happening, and whistleblower and how difficult it is to do that. So I just wanted to raise that concern, especially when we're looking at equity in the process, that that is a big consideration, that the people who are actually doing the cleanup don't walk away from these sites now dealing with health issues later down the road, where in most cases they may not have health insurances and all these other things. I just wanted to raise that.
That's a great point, Lorraine. And just to add on to Sarah's comment, before I was in this role, I worked as a cleanup contractor for DEQ, and under their orphan program, and worked with DEQ on some cleanup sites. And I can tell you that DEQ has really strong protocols to ensure appropriate PPE, personal protective equipment, and that there is a adequate risk characterization and exposure that is really detailed in reports prior to any cleanup. So just speaking on behalf of DEQ's process, I can tell you it's pretty robust, but your point is a very good one.
Thank you.
Right, Chris, and then Robin.
Yes, I just wanted to get some sort of like summary of how much money we're spending. It's out of the ES fund, and is it going to be evenly distributed across the timeline of like 15 years, or is it ramping up? How is that all working?
So I'll take that. Thank you for that question, Chris. So this is coming from the Bureau of Environmental Services, and specifically, there are components coming out of a couple different sources. One of the sources is the CIP budget that will address those 15 areas, the stormwater treatment areas. 13 of those have already been budgeted and they're incorporated in the queue, and like Andrew said, at various stages of the process. So there are 2 additional ones that are now going through the portfolio management process and are being budgeted through the CIP. For the cash components, that starts out with our highest payment of 10.5 million at the first year and then tapers down. I believe it's, please don't quote me on this, but I can refer to the structure in the agreement itself. I believe then it's 8 million the next year and then 5 in the last. So it is graduated down over those 3 years.
So in 3 years, we'll give up all the money, but it'll take roughly 15 years for it all to clean up. Is that what I'm hearing?
For us to conclude our obligations. Yeah. Now we do, in exchange with the way that the legal instrument or agreement works in this case, we'll get that protection as soon as we enter into the agreement. And then of course we need to fulfill our obligations over that set amount of time. And then DEQ is the one that oversees that work and is the one that checks off to make sure that we're completing that adequately.
And then will there be like a trip at the end, so we could potentially owe more, or is it we do our 3 payments and if it goes over budget, DEQ covers it, or how does it work?
It is a fixed contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, hello everyone. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to give a heads up to the board. We have about 10 minutes left. I do want everyone to be able to say what they'd like to say. And so I am expecting that this conversation might be right up to 5 and that we might need about 5 extra minutes after the meeting just to finish board work. So I just want to give the board members a heads up on that one. But I have 2 just clarifying questions. I believe I saw that the city is responsible for 209 of the outflow basins. What was the number of total outflow basins in the area?
Of public and private?
Possibly. I just know that like a 700 or 800 number I think was thrown out there, and I just was trying to figure out how much is the city's responsibility compared to whatever total number is being acknowledged.
Andrew, do you want to take that one?
Sure, you got. Yes, so you absolutely read that right, Robin. There, the city owns approximately 200 outfalls. I think it's 209 by the last count. Sometimes some of our outfalls get combined, so there's little tiny changes. But generally it's about 210 outfalls that the city owns. And there are an additional approximately 550 private outfalls that discharge to the slough. And as far as the responsibility question, that's probably a much deeper discussion. I think a lot of and Sarah can comment on this probably as well as anyone, but a lot of the contamination that is within the slough itself, within the slough sediments, a lot of it is from historical, industrial, and agricultural sources, not necessarily from outfalls discharging to the slough itself. But the outfalls do represent potential ongoing sources, and that's part of our process of ensuring that there's no potential for recontamination within the slough.
Okay, and that actually leads to my second question, which was just the way that we're talking about cleaning up soil and water makes me wonder, is the Columbia Slough classified as a Superfund site?
That's a great question. It is not. It's very similar to Portland Harbor in that it is a cleanup site, and it goes through pretty much an identical cleanup process of characterization, risk assessment, feasibility in terms of what actions and solutions are possible, and then a record of decision for the chosen actions that are chosen by the regulatory authority to implement. But in this case, the Columbia Slough is a state-run cleanup site. Okay. Sarah, did you want to add anything else to that? This is your world more than me.
No, that sounds great. Yeah, Superfund is a federal nexus, but in this case, it's just a state, which is good, a state-led cleanup.
All right. Well, thank you.
Rosalind and Karen.
Cheers, thanks. Appreciate the presentation. And Rosalind Gray, ex officio BES representative. I was wondering if you guys can share any more information about how DEQ identifies and implements the remaining remediation and restoration.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we, how Andrew has said, we have identified, the last 15 years or so, we've done quite a bit of characterization in particularly the lower slough and the Whitaker Slough, taking sediment samples in various configurations, just trying to identify where those particular areas, what we call hotspots, or above kind of baseline concentrations that need to be addressed. And so we've done quite a bit of characterization. We have a couple of sites where we have 30% design. We're kind of ready to go. We just need some funds to do the additional, kind of design work and get it almost shovel ready. And so with these funds, we will be able to to do some of those initial works on those priority sites. Maybe in the future, we'll be able to do, some additional evaluation on some of the other particular locations. A lot of these are smaller locations. They're surrounded, kind of at former or at current stormwater outfall locations. So the sediment areas aren't real big, but they, kind of represent, after you have 200 or, several outfalls, they represent larger areas. And so we're hoping that with this funds, we can kind of combine that effort. Instead of going kind of a piecemeal approach, we can just kind of combine all that effort and do it kind of in batches or something to kind of, facilitate, efficiencies in the cleanup process.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Karen.
Hello, Karen Williams, voting member speaking. Thank you. This really appreciate as a pub member. Thank you for bringing us this presentation, asking for our input. And I just want to say in full disclosure, I am an employee of the Department of Environmental Quality, though not at all related to this program. Hello, Sarah. Fantastic presentation. My question is actually budgetary, and I think it may actually go to Farshad, but anyone who can help me recall and understand. I'm thinking back to our budget input and discussions of several months ago when we were debating the increase above the forecasted rate and the need for that increase. And my recollection was that paying for what you all just described, the city's payment for this was in the that amount of forecasted rate above the 3.5% that ultimately was not approved. So I guess my question is indeed that the case that that this 16 million plus 2 million plus 1.5 million that we're talking about is the city's contribution to this agreement, or the carrying out this agreement, was in fact that initially thought to be funded by that increase in the rate above 3.5%. And if I have that wrong, then it doesn't matter. But if I'm recalling that right, then I guess my question is, what are the budgetary implications? Like, what are we not going to be able to do in terms of maintenance and a lot of the other projects that we know are on BES's plate because we are funding this agreement?
Thanks, Karen. That's a fantastic question. Farshad Aladadi, Business Services Group Manager, BES. I will just say, because I think it's hard to track a lot of these numbers and the budget implications and the revenue side. So I'm just going to generalize that we budget, our financial forecast is a long-term financial tool. It's not as transactional as it may seem, that if we don't get this, we can't pay for this, that the rate increases build our financial capacity to pay for work over time, a longer time. And if we know that there are these large liabilities coming, if we can build our rates, it gives us time to build our rates more slowly and build the base so that we have the resources when we need them. Last year, we, again, generalized, we communicated some regulatory liabilities generally that we were budgeting for and needing a 5.15% rate increase to start building that capacity. And part of the communication was, if we don't get that rate increase, the rate increases in the future will just have to be that much larger to make up for our accumulating of those resources. So we have forecasted 5.15% moving forward. We have made some short-term adjustments to accommodate our regulatory obligations. We are forecasting 5.15% and we'll be requesting that level of rate increase this next budget period. But I think, so I guess the short answer is that our general obligations are part of our long-term forecast, and we were able to make some adjustments to respond to the council's action last year. But we really need to have the rate increases that we're forecasting to have those resources available for work like this.
Thanks, Farshad, and I just can't help commenting on that's an amazing sweater. Thank you for.
I wore it just for you.
All right. So with that, I actually wanted to ask the presenters, did you have an ask of us after this presentation? Would you like us to engage with the process at all, or is this more informational on our parts?
Well, of course, we wanted to make sure that the pub members understood this proposed agreement. After consideration, we would hope that you would lend your support to us as we go to council. We're looking at potentially going to council January 17th. That's still tentative. So we'll be working on a date soon. But if the board is open to it, we would love to have your support as we go to council and seek authorization to enter into this settlement.
All right, so thank you for that, for clarifying that. With it being near the end of our meeting, I think that that might have to be kind of a on the back end conversation via email possibly. But I just want to say thank you to all of you for presenting and engaging with us today. And we're very happy to be part of this collective process. So yes, thank you once again.
Thank you all so much
Thanks
for your
so
time.
much.
All right. And then with that, let's just take a minute or two just to be mindful of any outgoing information that we'll need. Amy, did you want to take a lead on this one, or I can just read off the screen?
I can. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll just move really quickly. The budget update, I'll update via email. You'll be getting another guidance memo from the mayor, hopefully in a couple weeks. So we'll figure out how any of the guidance and the information that you need from the bureaus in the coming meetings are impacted. So I'll connect with you by email. Again, we didn't loop back around about the joint parks board meeting. So that's part of the reason I put it on this ending slide, is because there is that ask on the table of whether pub is interested in engaging in that joint meeting at the parks board currently scheduled time on January 9th, 5 to 7 p.m. So that is on the table for folks to consider. The EPA proposed lead copper rule improvements, I have sent information out via email, so you have links and information there. You can let me know if you have any questions. So I think the most immediate time sensitive is about that January 9th meeting, just because our next meeting is pretty close to the holiday on December 21st. The next pub meeting is close to the next holiday on January 2nd. And then this would be another meeting potentially the week right after that. I did ask for some feedback from folks on whether they were interested in having the January 9th meeting take place if they were available, and potentially replacing one of the meetings like the January 2nd meeting. And I've had feedback on both sides of the coin. So, and didn't hear from everybody yet. So we have different people in the room than I heard from. So would love to hear your feedback on that as well. Lorraine.
Can I get the why? I don't think I was at the meeting where this was discussed.
So the discussion at the prior meetings was related to the natural resources and the decision that council made on November 1st. And the Commissioner Ryan's amendment, which would be moving program services under parks. And there was some discussion about the potential that different stakeholder groups like the Parks Board and the pub are maybe not getting the same information. And so part of the letter that you just approved included an ask of having some coordinated joint meetings where the boards are getting the same information. And so this was staff's attempt to identify a potential date to kind of share the next round of information. We know that there are some other things coming down the road, including a work session with council related to the natural resources stuff. We know that the work group is continuing to do their internal work. The BES director was meeting with legal about some of those components, as were part of the key folks related to that. So I think it's just another opportunity to have the board be getting consistent information with other stakeholders so that it can then inform what your next round of feedback may be when it comes time, either through the work session on this specific issue or through the budget process or elsewhere.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. So it is not clear yet to me whether we will have a quorum for either the December 21st or the January 2nd meeting. So if you did not respond to me, if you could just check the email and respond to me with what your plan is as far as participation in those meetings and availability, as well as for the January 9th. And then I can coordinate with the chair offline so that we can make some decisions about agenda for those upcoming meetings to maximize the time that's available, particularly if any decisions are required with a quorum of board.
Go ahead, Karen.
I wondered if I could just throw one more option out there for you all's consideration, and that is for that January 9th meeting, if we do decide to go ahead and have a joint meeting with the Parks Board, what about having our business meeting like 4 to 5? I'm just thinking, you know, we always have so much for, especially in January with budget stuff. I'd hate to miss our business meeting entirely, but I'm also sympathetic to having one on January 2nd and another one on January 9th. And maybe we could consider just having a shorter business meeting right before that joint meeting. I just wanted to throw that out for people to think about.
All right, so with that, I guess it sounds like nothing will be decided in this moment. So make sure to please check your emails. If we don't have quorum, I just want to say happy holidays to everyone celebrating the holidays in this next month. And yes, please keep Amy up to date on your availability because it will impact how we navigate the rest of the month and the start of budget season. So please give us your unfiltered opinions. I know I have already emailed in mine. So with that, meeting adjourned.